get ready. You know, I don't know if you like that or not, but it's going to happen. All right, I think we are good to go. Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, May 19th, and you are here at MS Office Hours. My name is Heather Cox, and with me today are my co-hosts,
Victoria Dean,
Garrett Chandler,
Andrea Sangrio,
and we are here with Weston, who's going to tell us how to not be basic anymore. Weston's going to make us level up our game. So we'll turn it over to you, Weston. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, and good afternoon, everybody. So I've got a really brief presentation here. I'm going to talk a little bit about legacy authentication. We'll talk about why it's important, what's happening, what you need to know. We have some really big changes coming in the very near future. So we'll do a really brief slide deck, follow along and talk about what some of the big changes that are going to be. I'll jump into a quick demo today. Yes.
Don't want to cut you off, but there is some scratchy audio. So I don't know if there's another way to switch the audio or.
Let me try something.
Because it's being a little scratchy. Although I do love the reporter like side mode here. I'm digging that. And I like how you guys get to, if you haven't tried any of these other views, while he's working on that, you just let me know and I'll stop talking when you're ready. The one that where you are in front of the screen, I'm going to need anybody who does that to make sure that their content is not being blocked by their head. So just keep that in mind.
All right, how about now? Does it sound better?
Oh, so much better. Go for it.
Right on. Cool. Yeah, so got a real brief presentation. We're going to talk about legacy auth and why we need to know about this. So just advance my slides here. Real quick level set. You'll often hear us talk about legacy authentication or basic authentication. We'll kind of use them interchangeably, but that is how we've authenticated really for decades now. And it's really just providing a username and a password. But there are some pretty big drawbacks to basic authentication. The biggest one being we can't really interact with the user in any meaningful way. We can't check their device health. We can't look at their device at all. We can't make them go through a multi-factor authentication prompt. And typically basic auth was heavily used in older protocols. So POP3, IMAP, Exchange Web Services. For the longest time, those only supported basic authentication. Now, the protocols have officially been updated, so they can support modern auth, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So I've got a real brief couple of diagrams kind of explain what I'm talking about when I say how limited basic auth is. So basic authentication, your mail client has your credentials. It reaches out, it talks to an endpoint like an Exchange Online server, and all it knows how to do is just blurt out that password to the first server it talks to. So your mail client talks to Exchange Online, says, hey, here's my password, take it, go authenticate me and give me my email. So step 2 is the Exchange Online server proxies that password somewhere, either Azure AD for cloud authentication, or if you have federated, ADFS or Okta or one of those, it runs that over to your identity provider. But the Exchange server is doing all the work here. The email client has thrown their password at the service, and that's the end of it. Well, that's not really great. So here's an example. This is a really old interface for Outlook, by the way. If anybody's been doing this for a long time, this might be pretty familiar. But you would actually store your credentials in the application, and then it would just authenticate on your behalf all of the time. So that's the way it was for a long time. Why is this coming up now? And the answer here is every single day we are inundated with attacks of users getting compromised. So in any given month, we have over 1 million unique compromised users in Office 365. When I found out that number, I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't think it could possibly be quite so bad. And then 1 million users, that's about 0.5%. So especially in our organizations, when we start thinking about how many users we support, if 0.5% of them are getting compromised every month, that's a lot of compromised users. Now, there's no such thing as perfect security. That said, the absolute overwhelming majority of those, 99.99%, that's the actual number, don't have MFA. And in fact, MFA adoption continues to be a struggle, especially in our types of organizations. So what are we doing about it, right? So we, year after year, we saw these millions of compromised users, and we realized we had to do something about it. And so there are other options. There are ways to get away from basic authentication, but organizations, by and large, just weren't making that move. So Microsoft decided February of 2020 that we were going to give them a gentle nudge, and that later that year, we were going to be disabling it on their behalf. Now, that year obviously didn't go the way we thought it would, but we have since come back out and reaffirmed that we're going to be disabling basic auth for pretty much all of the protocols that support it. So EWS, POP, IMAP. You'll notice I put SMTP on there, but then I crossed it off. So I included that because in all of the original documentation, we said we were going to be removing basic auth for SMTP as well. However, at this time, there is a state of execution on that, and we have not scheduled SMTP basic auth to go away. But while we're in here, feels like it's probably a pretty good time to address SMTP as well. So my pitch to you is don't just wait for October for everything to just get shut off. When we do a like-for-like comparison between two tenants, one with legacy auth turned on and the other one with it blocked, we see a 2/3 reduction in compromises just from that one setting. And it actually does not take very long to turn it off, right? When I do my demo here in a minute, you'll see how quickly you can have legacy auth disabled in your tenant. But it goes a lot more than just turning it off, right? In order to be successful in doing this, we have to plan this out. So I can tell you a little bit about when Microsoft did this. We originally intended to turn off basic auth back in 2018. We had a project plan. Everything was all planned out, ready to go. We had executive buy-in, and so we started turning off basic auth internally at Microsoft. So we started with IT. Everything went great. We moved on to our next division. Everything didn't go great. We had some pretty catastrophic outages from disabling basic auth. And the lessons we ultimately learned were that without the data, right, without knowing what was going to be impacted by doing this, we couldn't confidently move forward. And so we took those lessons that we learned in a very difficult way, and we applied that to our customers. And we said, hey, if we just turn off legacy auth on our customers, they're going to be in just as much trouble as we were. So we've actually created the ability for you to go out and get some information, get some data on who might be using legacy auth. And so I've got a real quick demo. I spun up a test environment. I did some basic auth logins. I actually found an old version of Thunderbird to do this. So we're going to take a quick look at that. And if you want to follow along at home in your own tenant, feel free to pop into the admin center, and you can run some of the same queries that I'm going to be using and kind of get a better idea of potentially how much exposure you have to this change that's going to be made. So let's see. We're in our main O365 admin center. We're going to pop into our Azure Active Directory admin center, one of the myriad of admin centers we have. So once we're in here, we're going to click on users. And then once we're in users, we're going to go into user sign-ins, right? Because we want to get a report of actual user logins with basic authentication. Yeah, and just as a quick note, Thunderbird has been updated to support modern auth. In fact, pretty much every mail client that is enterprise scale can support modern auth, but oftentimes it's about making sure you have the updated version and that it's correctly configured. So now that we're in our Azure sign-in logs, you can see the default view for me is last 7 days and all logins. So in order to get good information out of here, we're going to make a couple changes. I'm going to kick this out to the last month. And then I'm going to add a couple of filters. So the first one, I don't care about all the bogus logins from all over the world with bad passwords. I don't want to look at those. So I'm just going to look at successful logins. Then I'm going to add one more filter. And this is the key one. We're going to add the client app filter. So the product group made this really easy for us. They added a page break. So all of the fun, happy, modern auth clients are here. All of the legacy auth, we need to look at these clients are here. So for this demo, I'm just going to add all of these. But when you're doing this to get your lists, you might want to tackle just a few at a time. So here we go. I've got quite a few users. Shocking, I know. And so I click on one of these logins. Here we've got Adele's login. And it'll tell you a little bit of information, but you notice I click on device info. I get nothing, right? Location, maybe I get an IP. That was part of the problem I mentioned earlier with basic auth, is because you just throw your password at the first server you talk to, we don't really get to look at the client and what they're doing. We don't know a lot about them. And so the one small bit of information you might be able to glean in your sign-in logs is user agent. So this is where, if it's an active sync device, you might see like a version of iOS, for the Mac Mail client or something along those lines. But a lot of times, you're just not going to have really useful information. So this report here shows me all of the users in my tenant in the last month that have used any of the basic auth protocols. Everybody on here, if we do nothing, is going to stop working starting in October. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to export this list. You can go through and download the view, and it will extract all of this to a CSV file. You can deduplicate that and start messaging these users, start reaching out. What I kind of like to do is I'll actually select a few of these at a time. I might do just active sync. And I know this is all going to be people using their native mail app on their phone. And I'll send them an email. Hey, you're getting this email because you're using a legacy version of ActiveSync. Here's a link on how to fix that. It's going to be going away soon. And you want to start doing that now, right? It's summer's here. October is not that far away. So on one hand, you want to start reaching out to those users. On the other, we can actually start protecting ourselves from basic auth today. And so we do that by creating what's called a conditional access policy. Now, that's probably the best way to turn this off. So going back to Azure AD, I'm going to go into security, and I'll actually walk you through how long it takes to make one. It is not long at all. So inside of security, we go into conditional access. You can actually see I've already created one that was a test policy. So I'm creating a new conditional access policy called block legacy auth. First, we have to select users or groups of users that are in scope. So I'm going to say everybody. Now, you're probably thinking, well, if I do this now, I'm going to block all of those users we just saw in that report. So that's not going to work for me. I have to get them all fixed first. So one thing you might opt to do is you can add all of those users to a group, right? A group you've already identified as people still using legacy auth. And then in your block rule, you can exclude that group of users. So in this case, for the demo, I've actually gone through and I've created a distribution group hidden from the address book. No one's using it for email, but it's called my legacy auth exempt group. So all of the people in that group are the ones in my tenant that I know are still using legacy auth, and I need to get around to them and get that fixed, but I still want to get this policy turned on. So this allows me to turn it on for everybody else. And then as I start fixing the users, I can pull them out of this group. I go to Cloud Apps or Actions. We're just going to include all apps. You could just scope this to Exchange if you wanted. And then again, under Conditions, the client apps area is the one that we are most concerned with. So I'm creating a rule to block all legacy auth clients. So I'm going to uncheck these top two boxes. And then under access controls, there's a grant access, and I'm just going to say block. So we have a conditional access policy that says for everybody, except the group of special people that are using legacy auth, block that access. Then down here at the bottom, I'm going to turn this on. And it's going to warn you saying, hey, try not to log yourself out of Office 365 with your admin account. So we created that policy. It'll take a little bit to bake. And now when I go to these sign-in logs, you'll see, and I've actually done one of these already. You can see for Alan here, those login attempts are going to be blocked. And I can actually show you what that login attempt looks like. So yeah, if you do all of the steps we just did, which, you know, didn't take long other than reaching out to all of your users and getting them on board, you're going to be all set. Now, I go back to my report. I actually had an attempt from Alan earlier, so I turned it off for him yesterday when I was doing this demo. And now you can see when I click on his login attempt, it was a failure. And I can tell that because I go to conditional access and I see result failure from Alan's special block rule. So you can actually turn this on today, exempt the people that are using it, and immediately the vast majority of your organization is going to be protected. And you can focus on those users that you've still got left. So what are the big keys to success here? So we don't have a lot of time. Obviously, and I've talked to organizations that they had, you know, the backing to just turn it off now, and those users will figure it out. I don't know that I agree with that. I think reaching out and being proactive is going to be really critical. Get your management to buy into this, right? If the organization isn't backing your efforts to get this turned off and disabled now, you're going to run into trouble when you start telling users that they need to do something differently than they're already doing it. And then for me, the big one is consider all of the different user accounts that are in there. Obviously, if it's someone's on an old iOS version or has an old mail client, that's easy. You just get them set up. But you might start running into service accounts or third-party applications. Does that application even have modern auth? If not, we're going to have to figure something else out. I'm seeing a lot of organizations that are frantically having to figure out a new voicemail system or a new ticketing system because the one they have now only supports logging in with basic auth. So get that list, start looking at it, start digesting what's going to be hard, what's going to be easy to fix, and hopefully start reaching out soon. So thank you all for coming to my presentation on that. Obviously, if you have any questions on any of this, we are happy to help. So do please reach out.
It looks like John put one in the chat. Can we configure this conditional access policy to And set to report only to test.
Absolutely. And here's what that looks like. So as I go back into my security section, so report only, whenever you create a conditional access policy, report only is like what if mode, right? Don't actually turn this on, but I want to report on this later. Report only mode is really useful, especially if you have log analytics turned on and you're ingesting those logs into a system, which is going to then be able to do reports on them. But if you're ever not sure about a conditional access policy before you turn it on, that's this button right down here, which good thing, test everything first. You can do report only mode. And then I can come back in here, I can do a login, and it will tell me, well, this block legacy auth policy would have applied, but it's in report only mode. So that's a great way of testing this out and making sure you feel confident that nothing's going to get caught that you haven't thought of until you come back in and switch this back to on. So
sorry.
I see some more questions. We're going to get to all these. Can the user sign-in logs go back further than 30 days? So not in the Azure AD portal. If you have log analytics, obviously you can keep those. If you're exporting your logs to, a SIEM client or something, obviously you have those logs, you can go back as far as you want. But in this interface, we only have those 30 days. How can we audit report only mode? So again, that's where, doing something with log analytics is what that was, I think, meant for. There's not a linked report you can get to without that.
And Tom has his hand up. Tom, do you want to come off of mute and ask your question?
I didn't realize I had my hand up.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, Tom, nice to talk to you.
I did post something though with a question with regards to the Exchange team posted a blog post on May 3rd that talked about, because I've gone through this process Weston was suggesting, and we're in the process now of having the big exclusion group and slowly weeding people out. And so the primary policy, conditional access one, is for any new users, they have that applied to them. But then blog post says that the conditional access to use instead use authentication policies to block basic auth. And they reference a different one where it clearly states if you want to block basic auth, use auth policies. Don't use set CAS mailbox or conditional access, as those are both post authentication. So I get where they're coming from. And I guess I'm looking for guidance or clarification, as opposed to, is one better than the other? I can understand where the authentication policy could be better than conditional access as the pre versus post, or if they can be used in some kind of conjunction. Because I think it was their own post from the Exchange team where they suggested conditional access, and it seems like gears have been shifted, and I'm not entirely sure which one plays best in these efforts.
Yeah, that is a really good question there, Tom. So for those that don't know, there are other ways to block basic authentication. There's an Exchange authentication policy, and you can just uncheck all of those boxes. And I think long-term, ultimately, that's probably the better way to do it. This one is nice because this is something I can get out there. I can pilot to a group of users. I can do report-only modes, and it's really easy for me to add people to that exclusion for the policy. Now, best security practice is going to be do pre-auth, which is blocks the attempt before they even have time to submit their credentials. I would say long-term, that's probably what I would do, but most of the people I'm talking to are, just trying to get something out the door that day or very quickly. And I think conditional access is probably has a lower barrier to entry to get that going. So great question though.
So start with conditional access and then long-term enforce with the other.
Yes.
Sounds reasonable. Thank you.
And since we're really close to 5 o'clock here Eastern time, I know there are some questions in here. If Weston has some time and he can kind of go back and maybe respond in the chat, Weston, that would be great if you're able to do that. I will try to get the recording posted sooner rather than later for everyone. Thank you so much, Weston, for the presentation today. Start spreading the word, friends, because while it sounds like October is going to be a while away, it's amazing how quickly that time sneaks up on us. I'm shocked that we're already at the end of the school year for my kids, and I'm sure those of you out there who have children and things like that. Oh, Steve Lane, we need, yeah, we'll have maybe an after hours happy hour at some point in time. So no, we did not change any meeting options, Dwayne. So I don't know what has happened outside of the running meeting. We haven't changed anything, but we'll try to find out some more information. I will stop the recording, but we are back next week with our dear co-host and friend, Miss Andrea. She's presenting for us next week for her birthday. So Stephanie went to visit customers, and Andrea's going to come and present. Always working. This crowd's always working.